So I'll use that wonderful quote, "Too old to work, too young to die." That's actually a real quote from Walter Reuther from 1948, and he described retirees in that state. But as many of you know, Bruce Springsteen turned 60 this year, so if Reuther had been around, he would have probably said, "Too old to work, too young to die, but not too old to rock and roll." Saul showed the pictures of his grandkids this morning, and it set off an emotional pang in me because when I turned 54 years ago, I had a couple of pictures like that, but they weren't my grandkids, they were my kids. And I knew that I was going to be working for quite a bit longer, that this was really going to be a long-distance race. And around that time, I read a quote from Mary Catherine Bateson, the daughter of Margaret Mead, and she said, "We'd stretch midlife so long it had become like a run-on sentence in desperate need of punctuation." And I was in desperate need of punctuation, not a period for sure. I couldn't afford that or want that. A comma was a little bit too short, so I went for the semicolon, and I went to my board and I accumulated all my vacation time and decided I would take a sabbatical. The first idea was to go to Australia, but after a while, the idea of spending 3 months in a hotel room in Australia with two screaming 1- and 3-year-olds seemed like the thing that you took the sabbatical to recuperate from. And so it got downscaled to a car trip up the Pacific coast. The first stop was going to be in Medford, Oregon, and I started making plans. And I got the guy at the Homewood Suites in Medford on the phone, and I was trying to save some money because this trip that I had fantasized about to Australia, I ended up using all my frequent flyer miles for, and it cost me $1,000 from United Airlines not to go to Australia to get my miles back. So I was trying to save every penny I could. I started rattling through the discounts, AAA, was there a weekend rate, and finally it dawned on me, I was eligible. I got the AARP discount. I was so proud of myself. I went rushing out to my wife, telling her that I had saved us over $14 on this hotel room. She still remembered the $1,000 we paid not to go to Australia, and asked me if I had remembered to get the 2 cribs. So I crawled back into the office. I got on the phone with the same guy I had been talking to, who was a moonlighting at the hotel. He was in college at the time, and I said, "Yes, it's Mr. Freedman." He said, "Yeah, Mr. Senior Citizen Discount." And I said, "Can I have 2 cribs?" And I expected to get carded. I expected the entire cast from the FBI to come, arrest me for this great contradiction in terms, because I had become part, to go back to Saul's introduction, of the oxymoronic group. The young old, the working retired, the walking dead. Many of you out there I know have also entered that unofficial club. But this period beyond midlife has ceased to make any sense. It's not just those contradiction in term labels that I just went through, but we're told on the one hand that to cling to our fast-fading youth. 60 is the new 40. On the other hand, you go to the Homewood Suites or to the movie theater, you get that senior citizen discount. So apparently 60 is also the old 80 or the old 65. At the same time, it's the new 40. And it is confusing territory, not just at the personal level, where you've become a neither nor, neither young nor old, but as a society, we seem to be equally confused. We celebrate this great triumph of longevity, right? Life expectancy in this country was 47 at the turn of the last century. Today, it's close to 80. That's greater than all the increases in human history for the previous 2 millennia. And you go to the doctor, and what do? They tell you to eat your cruciferous vegetables, to reduce your stress, to live right so you can live long. And then you pick up the editorial page and you hear about this long gray wave of greedy geezers about to take America to the cleaners, bankrupting posterity, the dependency ratio. And then you kind of wonder which way is it? How is it that the best thing that ever happened to us as individuals, the thing we're supposed to strive for, turns out to be this collective calamity? And not only that, demography is destiny, right? It's inevitable. If these people are already alive, we're going to soon face this awful fate. It's no surprise that Christopher Buckley wrote a book, Boomsday, a few years ago, proposing euthanasia at 70 for boomers, and that the new movie, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, I expect many of you saw that. It's all built on the premise of outsourcing the elderly. So, well, if we can't persuade them to euthanasia at 70, maybe we at least get them to go to an entirely different continent. I'm here because I'd like you to consider an alternative, just in case those two don't work out, which is that 60 is not the new 40 any more than it's the old 80, that 60 is the new 60, and the tens of millions of people who are flooding into this period in life are something entirely new on the landscape. They're really poised to invent a new stage of life. Now that sounds counterintuitive, right? It's not like you suddenly decide to invent a new season and stick it between summer and fall. It seems like the oxygen in the air, like fixtures. This is the pattern of life. But as we stretch lifespans to 100 in this century, half the children born since 2000 in the developed world are expected to see their 100th birthday. We can't just stretch the life course that was designed for 70 and expect everything is going to work out. In fact, a lot of the hand-wringing about this big societal change comes from a sort of scenario planning through the rearview mirror, where we take the new numbers and bring it together with the old lifestyle and think everything is going to unravel. But in fact, we've invented life stages about every 50 years in this country, and we did it to solve problems. Well, I've got the flyaway mic. Thank you. Thank you. I learned that in studying retirement. There was no retirement when Walter Reuther said that people were too old to work, too young to die. It was a dreaded state, and within 10 years, a guy by the name of Del Webb had invented the golden years. He built Sun City, and on the first day, 100,000 people showed up. And they came for this idea of graying as playing, essentially a second youth. But 50 years before that, we invented the first youth in this country. There was no adolescence at the turn of the last century, but we had a proliferation of neither nors at that point. They were no longer children, not yet adults. We were worried about all these young people who had physical maturity, but emotional immaturity. We created a holding period for them called adolescence. It took us 40 years to coin the word teenager with the invention of 17 magazine in 1944. The irony is that the person who invented adolescence was a 60-year-old, a guy by the name of G. Stanley Hall, who was the first president of Clark University, just 45 minutes up the road. And Hall had this vision of a moratorium period for young people, this beautiful period where they could ripen into adults. We invented high schools and child labor laws. It just became a fixture, part of that same notion of this is the natural order of a life. 20 years later, Hall was close to his death, and he said, "Oh, I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have invented youth. I should have invented a new stage of life between midlife and old age." He described it in poetic terms. He said it was an Indian summer. And he said that human beings didn't reach the height of their capacity until the shadows started slanting eastward. Not eastwood, but eastward. I was thinking about I've got my water over here on the bench. I'll stop at that point. So now it's almost 100 years later from when Hall gave us this idea of an Indian summer, and we've got 10,000 people a day who are turning 60. And they're entering this awkward period that for many will be as long as midlife in duration, these oxymoronic years. And it is unsustainable if we do try to stretch the old model for the second half of life into 30-year retirements. We can't afford to have a quarter of the population spending decade after decade in subsidized leisure. At the same time, there is this alternative, which is to go back to the drawing board, and I think it constitutes one of the great design projects of the 21st century, to invent this period in a way that fits with the true capacities and priorities of people who reach this juncture. And I think it does relate to that idea of shadows slanting eastward. You know, we tend to think of the asset of people who hit their 50s and 60s as experience. They've been around the block, they've got this time lived. But there's an equally important dimension, and that's the one of time left to live. You realize when you hit this point, and I realize it myself even with young children, that there are a lot fewer years ahead than there are behind. And that has a way of really catalyzing your thinking about what what matters most, what your priorities are. It doesn't hurt when Steve Jobs dies or you look at your college reunion notes and not everybody is there. And yet on the other hand, you realize that time is in many ways getting expanded at the same moment that it's getting compressed, that the longevity gains are continuing. And so in a way, there's this ripe moment where you realize that time matters more in a way than it did when you were 20 years old. And yet there is enough time ahead to do something significant with that. Mary Catherine Bateson, who I talked about earlier, describes it as active wisdom. In a way, wisdom in the past was wasted in the old. When Hall came up with his great insight, he was dead a year later. Now people have the opportunity not just to leave a legacy, but to live one. And I think they face something that kind of reminds me of that French Revolution slogan, remember, fraternity, liberty, equality, I can never get the order right, sort of mortality, longevity, and urgency, right? You realize the road doesn't go on forever, but it's probably going to go on for a fair bit longer. You probably have 20, 30 good years, but then you remember how fast those last 20, 25, 30 years went by, and so there's a motivation to get rolling on what's next. And I think that's the reason that so many people at this juncture in life have moved into what we've been calling at Encore.org an Encore career, passion, purpose, and a paycheck. 9 million people have already moved into that chapter in this stage of life. 31 million more say it's a top priority to do that, but they need better pathways to purpose. They're improvising in a variety of ways. I interviewed a woman last year whose daughter was in Teach for America. She saw her daughter teach. She was 60 in a classroom in Los Angeles, and she was so inspired, she decided to follow in her daughter's footsteps. She joined Teach for America, and soon she was in a dorm room in Houston in the middle of the summer in 112-degree heat, sharing a bathroom with 3 22-year-olds down the hall. But now she's teaching in a Denver public school. I think we need gap years for grown-ups and individual purpose accounts along with IRAs to help people navigate their way into this passage, school for the second half of life. I think we need to invent and innovate in all the ways that we did for old age and retirement over the past 50 years. And I think if we do that, if we pull that off, we can turn the longevity paradox into a payoff and produce a windfall of talent for the society that we have seen before. We saw it 30, 40 years ago when millions of women moved into new roles that had been off limits for their parents to their mother's generation. And at that point, there was this outcry. It's too much talent. It's going to be a zero-sum proposition. They're simply going to displace men and leave us in the same place as we started, but with a lot of pain and suffering along the way. And today we hear a lot of the same thoughts, but I don't think you can have too much talent in a society that has so many significant problems to solve. Where are all the human beings to do those things that only human beings can do? I think many of them are in this Encore generation that's coming rapidly down the road, this inexorable demographic force that asks us to marshal all of our creativity and insight and innovation to help channel into ways that draw on their experience and help them live that legacy that I talked about earlier. I think it can also be a surprise, a source of a huge amount of entrepreneurship and creativity. We tend to think of entrepreneurship as the exclusive province of the young, but over the last 15 years, it's been that older group that's been the most entrepreneurial of any in society, and many are moving into social entrepreneurship. At Civic Ventures, now Encore.org, we give out a prize every year, the Purpose Prize, that honors people over 60 who are doing their best work to make the world a better place for future generations. And one of my favorite winners is a guy by the name of Robert Chambers, who had been in mid-level positions in the banking business most of his working life, retired to New Hampshire to bike, and realized quickly that he couldn't afford to retire, so he got a job at a used car dealership. He saw that this dealership specialized in ripping off the rural poor, the woodchucks. They had special training seminars in how you actually did that. And day after day, he saw people leaving the lot with 5-year usurious loans, driving cars that might have 9 months left in them, the smoke belching out of the back of the car, and he decided to do something about it. And he created Bonnie Clack, and he called it Clack for car loans and counseling because He is a big fan of Car Talk, and he wanted to honor the Car Talk folks, but they provide fuel-efficient new cars, credit counseling, low-interest loans to low-income rural buyers. And for this achievement, he got summoned to the White House a year ago, along with a lot of young innovators, to celebrate his work. And when he got up on stage, he said, "I was old enough to know injustice when I saw it, and experienced enough to do something about it." And I can think of no better benediction for this opportunity that's right in front of us. So go out and have your encore. Thank you.